Good morning. This is Angela Coulter, Consciousness Transformation and Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift live stream / podcast, whatever you want to call it. So, I want to be quick this week. Had a lot going on, but I wanted to get on and talk a bit about ascending relationships, higher vibrational relationships. It's a topic that comes up a lot, and I've worked with many people over the past 10 years, actually, 8 years, whatever it is, on how to employ a higher vibration relationship as we get into a place of higher vibration ourselves. Because what happens is we shift and we start shifting in our consciousness, in our understandings, and yet we still continue in many cases playing out relationships in the same way that we've done in the past, even though a lot of our paradigms, a lot of our structures, our institutions, including marriage, it's sort of outdated in the more conscious kind of fashion. And we haven't yet seen that. Like, we haven't seen how to realize that, or we're just remembering how to realize that. But we're in such deeply ingrained habits of how to have a relationship that we look past that and we keep on tripping over that. So guidance was to talk about that today. And I've had a lot of conversations in the past, over years, but over the past week, it's been really a prevalent topic. So obviously that's why we're here. So what happens is, we go through these things. So what happens in many cases today is that somebody will be in a relationship, will be in a marriage or long-term relationships or whatever, and really start to accelerate their change. And traditionally, what we have done in our relationships is we have built this entire romantic idea around the idea that we have to have somebody feel whole for us. Or, and people come and say, well, when am I going to meet, the perfect mate, the perfect soulmate, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, first of all, anybody who's in your life is your soulmate, and you're carrying out whatever lessons that you agreed to carry out together so that you would learn in that reflection of the relationship and the person, no matter how good or bad the relationship seems to be. So be careful what you wish for, right? When you say, I want the perfect soulmate, you always do find the perfect soulmate for whatever it is you need to play out, right? So when we come to a relationship in a place of lack, and that's how I see it and how I understand it, is that when we come to this table in this place where I need you, I need somebody, right? I need somebody to complete me. I mean, think about that. What was that film, Jerry Maguire, where it's like, oh, you complete me. And we thought how romantic that is, right? And it's funny how we've created this notion of, relationships, really passionate relationships have to be built on this idea of need and a hole that we might have. When actually, as we're shifting into this place of higher vibration, of higher consciousness, what's really important to remember is that we're already whole. We're already whole on the inside, and it's a matter of remembering that we're there, right? And that we don't need anything to complete us. And I always tell people when somebody comes to me and says, well, when am I going to meet the perfect person, for me, and I know what they mean, even though they don't realize what they're saying, I'll say, when you don't need to. Because the reality is you don't need anybody. But when we have this belief of need and this belief of lack, it always comes from the ego. And so if we want to get into relationships of higher consciousness, what's really important is coming to a place of unconditional self-love first and foremost. And then number one, it doesn't matter whether you are with somebody or not. It doesn't matter, because you're happy with who you are and yourself. And then the people you meet will be a reflection of that within you, so that they'll be the people that you attract will be those who are in the same place, which means they're in unconditional self-love. They're in a place of wholeness and happiness. And if you choose to couple or have any kind of relationship or friendship or whatever, it will be from a place of, hey, let's play together. Let's just have this really good time together. And then it's like, it's a great bonus, right? It's like, yeah, well, we can play in the playground together. And by the way, if you go, I'm okay. And Patty Turjack here says, I find myself void of all human relationships, wanting to sell home and travel with dogs, peaceful in the mountains. And you know what? Sometimes that's what we need to do to really get back into who we are. You know, it's a challenge because we're in that, like I said, we're in such a habit. So we get frustrated with it. We get frustrated with the relationships that we have. We're like, oh, I want something better. And yet, really, the key is finding ourselves first. So, you know, I've had so many people. In fact, I have like a book to write. I have program. I might even do a program on this year in building higher consciousness relationships, because I've worked with so many couples and I never see them together. Number one, because you're never 100% truthful when the other person, no matter how close you are, is present, because you're afraid of, you know, them being upset about something you might say, or judgment or whatever. And so I always see them separately, right? When somebody comes to me in a coupling situation, a situation where the couple is like deciding on having issues, they might want to break up, or something like that. And whether it's one person of the couple or both, it doesn't matter. I say to them, the first thing for us to work on is this: what makes you happy? That is not dependent on the other person or any other people. And what's really surprising is that there is a large percentage of individuals who don't even know what makes them happy. And it's really not, because at the end of the day, nobody makes you happy but yourself, right? And so it's really not what makes you happy. It was what really allows you to embody your happiness, right? And embody the divine being that you are, and to be able to embody bliss and love. And that is not dependent on anything outside of you, right? So the first thing we work on is, then what is it that allows you to embody that within yourself without dependence on anybody else? Like if you were on some abandoned, you know, deserted island, or, you know, abandoned planet, you know, or whatever, however you want to look at it, what would you, and you had access to anything, or you could do anything and not have to worry about any other people, then what would you do? And 9 times out of 10, I get the answer, I don't know. So that's where we always start. And it's such a fight, because what will happen is, if somebody's irritated in a relationship or whatever, they come in and they're like, well, I want to leave. And I'm like, okay, so the first thing to do is find your own happiness before you decide on leaving. Because the other person is not making you unhappy or happy. It's you who's allowing yourself to do so. And that what's important is for us to find the place where you can be in your happiness. And then from there, make the decision on whether to stay or leave. And it's a split case. Sometimes they end up staying because it shifts the whole relationship, and sometimes they leave, but then they leave in a much better place where they won't have to attract the same relationship again in a different form to complete whatever lessons they were like learning in that exclusion and lack. So there's so much to really talk about in terms of, like, you know, where we go from there, right? And I was talking to somebody yesterday about that. It's like, well, okay, so when we find our own happiness, truly our own happiness and and we allow our own bliss to be embodied, again, then it becomes optional, because then we don't need to have anybody to make us happy, because we're like, oh, I'm pretty happy with who I am. And I can't tell you how many times I've worked with somebody who kept on asking me, when am I going to find this person? And I'll be like, when you don't need them anymore, when you don't need to find them anymore. And then time after time, it's happened when they've allowed themselves to let go of that idea and really just, focused on embodying that happiness themselves. They finally get to that place, and then bam, guess what happens? They meet somebody who's in that same place, and then it's an easy relationship, and it's fun, and it's high vibrational, and it's so different, right? So And it sounds really easy, but again, it's these really deeply embedded habits that we have that cause us to believe that a relationship is supposed to complete us, that we're supposed to, they're supposed to fill in something we're missing. And, and then, oh, I have to be. And then the other thing is I have to be with this person. And that's really become an interesting topic in terms of, the spiritual consciousness community, in terms of like things like twin flames and things like that. It's like, oh, I have to be with this person. And it's like, actually, you don't. Unless pure guidance, higher consciousness guidance from the higher consciousness heart is telling you that. Many times it's to help each other awaken. It could be a brief and intense encounter, or it could be something of a very higher vibration than any kind of what we call a romantic relationship in this kind of reality, to come together to hold a space in unconditional love that's a much more powerful one than we have held before. Because, by the way, and I could do an entire, which I'm sure I will at some point, do an entire podcast on twin flames. I have so much experience with that too. But I've known twin flames who are sisters, who are father-daughter, who are mother-daughter. So there's no like requirement that says, oh, I'm going to need to be with this person, this individual. It's to help us reflect and really get to the core of who we are. And everybody's journey is different. So everybody's requirement on completing that journey is different. So sometimes that will manifest itself in meeting a twin flame. Sometimes it'll be a friendship. Sometimes it'll be a romantic relationship. Sometimes it'll be a familial relationship. It doesn't have to be one thing or the other, right? And these are the things that we are sort of stuck in. It's like trying to put boxes around what relationships are. And when in the beginning I said, it's time for us to really rewrite the book on relationships, one of the biggest things that we get stuck in is this whole marriage thing, because we have a big box around that, and it is really outdated. And like we have this thing about dependence and roles, and we have so many things that are incorporated into that, and these expectations, right, of it's only a success if we can be together forever, no matter what. I actually was working with someone a while back who was deciding on whether to stay or leave a relationship that had really not been serving either one of them for a long time. And I don't impart an opinion, but like guidance was, yeah, they're pretty much, it's time for them to move on, right? But there was a lot of resistance because of like comfort, right? In this situation, there was a lot of money involved, right? So it was very comfortable. This individual was coming to me, and she had walked out on the husband because he had a like 9-year affair or something like that. And then he was begging to come back, because what happened was when she walked out, she started stepping into her own and becoming her own person instead of losing herself into the box and the roles within the marriage. And then he was like, oh no, like, look at this, I want to be with you. And nothing had really changed. And there was all this kind of stuff. Anyway, the point of me bringing that up is, then she did get back with him because it was easier. And she even admitted it. And then her husband, who had been brought up Catholic, was like, well, let's, I know you're going to this person, mate, about the relationship and, whatever, but I also would like us to go to a priest, because he was Catholic. And he's like, a priest for counseling or whatever. So they did. And what the priest said to them is, well, what's really important is for you to put the marriage above all else. And I was like, oh, that's totally opposite of where I come from, which is, it's really important for you to put your own self-love and unconditional self-love and authenticity above everything else, right? So anyhow, but that's how our culture, our religion, so many belief systems that, like we talk about putting these things, and we've put this marriage thing in such a box of, it's got to look like this, and I've worked with so many people who have open relationship marriages. They are married and living in separate states, and they have their own lives and all that kind of stuff. And then we have traditional marriages, and but the thing is, if we come to a place of happiness within ourselves, then we're not saying, okay, I'm a failure if I walk away from this marriage, because it's time for us to move on our journeys, both of us, in the highest and best way. And, I sort of call that, higher consciousness uncoupling, because I've done helped a lot of people do that. But also that, you can celebrate the success of completing the marriage if it's time. And some people are supposed, it does not supposed to, do benefit from being together the rest of their lives. But many don't. And yet they do so much. Hey, Anne. And they do so much to try to fit into that box that they sacrifice all of these things within themselves, because that's what we've been brought up to believe. So it's all an externalization of what other people think and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many discussions around that. But anyhow, coming back to the higher vibrational relationship. The higher vibrational relationship, when we stop depending on the other person to bring us happiness, then we give each other the freedom to grow at our own pace, right? To be comfortable in our own shoes, to be comfortable in our own path, and to not depend on, I have to go this way because I need to be with that person. But hey, this is awesome while we're on the path together and we're having a great time. And if it continues on together, great. And if the day comes when we're guided to go our separate ways, that's great too. That's getting out of the ego and the need and the lack, right? But then there's this whole other element, like this whole other set of layers that have to do with how we communicate in relationships. And that's not even like romantic. I'm talking about like all relationships. But we do tend to look at our cores, like whether it's our spouse, our kids, or whatever. And I talk about a lot coming from a place of love and beyond the ego and self-responsibility. And that takes a lot of practice. I was having this conversation yesterday because it's so easy for us to say, well, you really annoy me. Like, I can't stand it when you do this. I can't stand it when you do this. And the higher, that's a really lack of ego-based kind of thing, because then we're projecting stuff that's within ourselves out onto somebody else. What really is happening is when we get triggered is that they're reflecting something back to us that's within us to look at, right? So the question is always to ask, well, why? Why does that bother me? Why do I care? It's their journey. Until we get to a place, and there's an exercise that I teach in the Trinity 1 class, which is a self-mastery class, it's called the why exercise. And you keep on asking yourself, why do I care? Until you get to what I call the self-responsibility statement. And the self-responsibility statement is like, when this happens, I feel like this. I feel unworthy, I feel unloved, I feel abandoned, and whatever, because that is really the core of why you're triggered. It has nothing to do with what the other person's doing. That takes a lot of retraining, a lot of rehabituation on getting to a place of saying, I'm responsible for my own emotions. And then guess what? When that happens in a relationship and you continue to do that, it changes the way you interact, because eventually the other person's like, whoa, wait a second. Like, because then they almost feel guilty if they try to keep on pushing stuff on you. And you're just like, okay, well, I don't need to take it. I'm taking on everything that comes from me, right? And that's mine. And so everything that you do, or every kind of emotion you have, that comes from you. So the key is for us to come to a place of communication from a place of love and self-responsibility to say, okay, so this is what's triggering me, and I recognize that this is all me. And sometimes that helps if you're guided. You don't have to share it all the time. I don't with my husband. I'll just step away and not even engage, because I'll be conscious of a trigger and I'll be like, okay, there's something bothering me here, and it has nothing to do with him. And so then I can look at, and when we get into the habit of doing that, it's really amazing at how reflective it is, how it really gets to the core of some issues. I had a big one come up this week, actually. And the funny thing is, he has no idea that all that came up. And it was like, but that had nothing to do with him anyway. It had to do with what was deep down with me. It was something that was really raw. Shadows of a vision I had, blah, blah, blah. And it was a matter of me coming to acceptance of that energy and emotion within myself. So then I never have to then project that onto my husband or and vice versa. So what happens is, the more you do that, the more then that happens with both of you. And then it becomes so much more relaxed within a relationship, because nobody's on eggshells like, wonder, like thinking, oh, I don't want to get this person angry or da da da, and like you're not driven by that anymore. You're driven from a place of love and support versus lack and fear. And so that's like a lot of stuff that I just like wrapped up into a nice little present. But these are really basic ways for us to start being more conscious of our own place and where we are, right? And because if we're unhappy with ourselves, we will never be happy in a relationship with others. We will always be in a place of lack. We will always be behind the 8 ball because we will always be trying to run to catch up to this idea of a role or of the individual that I'm supposed to be, so that other people will think, or this other person will think I'm amazing, right? And then maybe they'll treat me great, because deep down when we think all that, what happens, what that's all about is, well, I don't believe I'm worthy of that to begin with, as I am. So I have to do all these other things to attain that. And if I attain that, well, then I expect that. Well, the thing is, expectations come from the ego too. And the more you keep on doing that, you're still then in this place of lack. And I can just sort of feel the ebb of the tide pulling away from you, because you're reaching for something when you already have it inside. So when we start coming to relationships from that kind of perspective, it really changes the way we interact. And then we start looking at, how does this serve me in my journey? Does this serve both of us in our journey? And that has to do, like I said, with not just romantic relationships, but with our families, with our kids, because who can trigger us the most? Typically, those people are our parents or whatever. And so it's a great lesson. And we've been, we're all soul family when we're all together like that. And then we are doing lessons together. So if we're triggering each other, we are here to give each other those messages. And instead of pushing the arrow onto the other person and saying, well, God, I hate it when you do this and da, 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 it's important to step back and say, so, why does that trigger me? Why, where's my self-responsibility in that? What is that reflecting back to me that makes me uncomfortable about myself? The other thing is, and then when we can do that, we actually can come to the table in authenticity and truth. And when we come to the table that way, and you say, well, this is who I am, we say that when we're in this place of unconditional self-love, to say, this is who I am, take it or leave it. And I am not going to be a better or worse person if you stay or go. But I'm happy for you to be here. I'm happy for us to be here together in this place of unconditional love. You feel that energetically, it's a much different kind of place to stay. And when we start interacting with others from that perspective, it really changes the vibration of our interactions and the vibration of the people that we attract to us. So if you have a whole bunch of people around you that you have the same kind of energies that are draining you or you feel crappy about or whatever, the key is to say, okay, well, let me look at this pattern, and why am I bringing that into my life to reflect back to me? What is it reflecting back to me about myself? And what's the self-responsibility in that? And again, then because as you do that, by the way, as soon as you recognize it, then those people can go away, and you don't have to, or the nature of the relationships can change, and then you don't have to have those relationships that way. So that's all I want to talk about today. I do have to sort of cut it short this morning, but that's the thing to look at this week is look at your relationships, look at your spousal relationship, look at your, your relationship with your family and the people around you. And especially look at those where you feel triggered a lot. And if you feel triggered, look at that and say, why do I care? Because it is not, my journey. The only thing that's my business is my journey, right? That usually we're trying to impart, our judgment of right or wrong or what's good or bad or whatever on their journey. And it's like, and part of that, what's underneath that is, well, then I'm more worthy because then I can give them my wisdom and all that kind of stuff, versus actually I'm really worthy being the lighthouse of unconditional love, because then it gives others around me permission to do the same for themselves. And then again, changes the nature of our relationship. So start with just looking at what triggers you. Look at the people who trigger you. And before you step forward and start getting angry at someone and projecting onto them, maybe just take 1 or 5 moments to step back and say, so what is it about me that's reflecting to me that's making me uncomfortable or angry or upset? And then see where that takes you. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter with Living the Shift.